Hello, welcome to the next lecture of ARCHLine.XP Advanced course. In this video, we will cover how to make suspended ceilings. In this project, I will show you how to make a plain or grid ceiling in the reception and meeting room. I activate the floor plan view and turn off the furniture and decorations layers so I can work more easily than rebuild the 3D model. Now I can work in empty space. I use the cutaway 3D build command to rebuild the part of the model. Let's look at the model in 3D. I switch to axonometry view and turn the model. The plain suspended ceiling is shown on the left. Here I have created reinforced concrete slabs between the floors and placed the suspended ceiling under them. I created a separate island and recess in which I placed LED strip. On the right side there is a grid ceiling. Let's get to work. I'm going to rebuild the full 3D model and go back to the meeting room 3 view. I delete the two suspended ceilings from the floor plan, as well as the line for the partial 3D build. That way I can start working in a completely empty space. The suspended ceilings are under building ceilings. We can see here the plain and the grid suspended ceiling command. We can create suspended ceilings with a polygon automatically or with a click in the room. I use the plain auto ceiling in all rooms command, which creates a ceiling in each room. In architecture, the symbol of the suspended ceiling is a sloping line, but we can change it in the Properties menu. In the 2D representation menu, the symbolic view is default, but we can set it to simplified or top view. Let's get started with the grid ceiling. I use Building menu Ceiling Grid Auto Ceiling Room command. I click in the room and the ceiling is automatically created. Let's see it in 3D. Further changes can be made by clicking on the pencil icon. In the first menu item, I can set whether I want to create a stripped or a suspended grid. I choose the second option. I can specify the length, the width of the grids. Now 600 by 600 mm panels have been distributed. I can change the reference point of the distribution. Now the center point is set, so the center point of the grid is also the center point of the suspended ceiling. I can change it to the top left corner, for example. In this case, I have to set the main and cross-runner offset to 300 mm. I will now reset this to the center point. The second tab allows us to configure the units, for example, the color of the panels. I'm using the white ceiling panel. In the next tab, I can set the default properties for lighting, fire protection, and air distribution. For lighting, I'm going to use this LED fixture. In the fire protection menu, I can select smoke and heat detector or download other items from the 3D warehouse by clicking on the plus button. The same goes for ventilation. I'm using this default ceiling vent now. I will use the following menu items to assign and modify lighting, fire protection, ventilation, and custom elements. In the third tab, lighting, I can set whether I want to place only one object or row, a column or a grid. I choose the grid and then set the steps. The main runner grid step here means that every third element is replaced by a light. Another important setting is placement. These elements can be placed by replacing the original panel, or they can be fitted to the bottom of the original panel. In such a lamp, we usually replace the panel. Let's move on to the fire safety elements. Here I'm placing only one object. I choose which panel I want to place it on. I use check mark to create it, and it's been inserted here at the bottom of the original panel. The next menu item is the air distribution. Here I place only one object and repeat the same steps as before. The next step will be the custom elements. In this example, I'm placing a CCTV camera. I select its location and change the placement to the bottom of the panel. Let's move on to the next menu item, which is the track system. Here we can set the cross-section profile of the main runner. If I click on it, I can see what I'm using. Here we can also set the cross runner, which is the same as the main one. We can also set the wall angle profile, for which I have also created a custom profile. I can create holes and inserts in the next tab, but I will show you how to do this in the plain ceiling. In the Penultimate tab, I can set the general settings, so the relative elevation, the layer, or the 2D representation. We see that the base elevation is not correct. It needs to be adjusted. I change it to 3000 mm. I save the finished ceiling on the last tab. I accept it with OK. Now let's look at the floor plan, what other changes I can make. I click on the ceiling. The next thing we will look at is how we can change the orientation of the suspended ceiling. I right-click and choose to define the reference point and the direction, and then the center of the unit. I select the center of one of the units and draw a direction. This will change the orientation of the whole suspended ceiling to 45 degrees. I undo it. We can see the symbols, a light bulb, the vent, the fire alarm, and the custom element. If I click on an item, I can move, copy, or delete it. I delete this CCTV camera, then create a copy from a light fixture. In 3D, you can clearly see that a copy of this lamp has been made. I can place additional elements in the false ceiling here on the floor plan by clicking on them and then choosing Add Units from the local menu. Here I can select which element to add. I'm going to create a new lamp. I select the lamp type and then select the first option. This will replace the panels for the lamps. I select the panels where I want to place it and press Enter to accept. We are done. We will continue with the creation of the plain suspended ceiling. To do this, I switch to Reception 1 view. I work on the floor plan. I select Building menu, Ceiling, Plain Auto Ceiling command. I click into the reception room and the suspended ceiling is done. Let's see it in 3D. I also need to adjust the relative elevation of this. I click on it and change it to 3000 mm in the side menu. I will also change its other properties. I will change the thickness to 200 mm. Let's create a recess in it. I activate the floor plan view. I've already drawn the contours of the suspended ceiling here so that we can work more easily. I choose to create the recess with the Building menu Ceiling Recess attachment, Create Recess command. I select the ceiling and draw the middle contour line using the Rectangle tool. Once this is done, I accept it by pressing Enter. Let's continue with editing of the recess. In the Ceiling menu, I choose the Edit command. I select the ceiling. The recess appears in the dialog. If we had added multiple elements, we would see in the list. Let's look at the model. The depth of the recess should be 100 mm and the reference plane should be 0. We can also set the material. I accept, and let's look at it in 3D. The next task is to design the recess for a LED strip. I select the suspended ceiling and draw the outer contour line using the rectangle tool, then press Enter to accept. Then select Edit. We now see that we have 2 items in the list. I choose Recess 2. The depth should be 50 mm. Our goal is to have the recess plane 50 mm above the reference plane, so I specify -50 mm. Let's move on. Now we are going to create an island ceiling. In the building menu, I choose Ceiling, Recess and Attachments, then Create Attachment. I select Ceiling, draw the inner contour line and then Edit as well. I select the false ceiling and select the attachment from the list. Let's look at the model. Our goal would be to have the bottom plane of the suspended ceiling and the island in line, so we also need to move this island up by 50 mm. We continue by installing the LED strip. I will draw it with interior lighting LED strip. I will draw around the outer contour line and place the LED strip here. I can specify the properties, whether it should be on or what its intensity should be. I set the dimming level to 50%. I can also adjust the color of the light if necessary. On the next tab, I can adjust the dimensions. Make it 10 mm wide and 20 mm high. On the last tab, I set the relative elevation, which will be 3050 mm, since the relative elevation of the suspended ceiling is 3000 mm and the recess is 50 mm above it. To see this in 3D view, I will create a cutaway 3D view. I switch to axonometric view so we can see the LED panel and the island. We can see that we have the suspended ceiling here, where we placed a recess, then the LED strip in that, and the island is completely separate. Now we come to the last topic. We are going to install spotlights. To make the spotlights part of the ceiling, I click on it and choose the pencil. On the second tab, I can select the lighting units. I choose the Spot 2. We can also create our own. Clicking on the pencil, we can modify the one we have created. In the second tab, we can select the spot type. In the fourth tab, I can specify the path, the number of the items, and the distance between them. The lamps on nodes and endpoints option should be enabled. With the option underneath, I can control whether the lights should be off or on. In the fifth tab, I can specify the profile. Now an automatic profile is selected as well as the same offset option, where we place the lights 600 mm from the edge of the suspended ceiling. If I want to place them with different offsets, I can uncheck the box and rewrite the values. For example, let it be 300 mm from the edge. We can see immediately that the profile changed in the preview. I reset it to its original state. I can use the green tick to place the lights. If we look at it, the lights are sticking out of the ceiling, so I have to modify it. I can adjust the vertical offset on the next tab. I need to move them 40 mm upwards. By default, the program does not cut out the ceiling for the lights, so we still need to set that up. I go to the third tab, tick the Make the Whole option, select the circle profile and enter the dimensions, which is 100 by 100 mm. Let's add another row of spotlights in the middle. I click on the plus button and select the horizontal base profile. I keep the same offsets option on and type in 2000 mm from each side, then use the tick to create it. On the General Properties tab, we can also enter the relative elevation. On the last tab, I save it. I name it Reception Ceiling and save it in my category Ceiling subcategory. Let's look at in 3D with furniture. I rebuild the 3D model. Let's look at some of the views I've saved in the project. Here we can see the completed plain ceiling in the reception area, and here is the grid ceiling in the meeting room. This brings us to the end of the presentation. I hope it was useful for you. See you at the next lecture. Until then, have a nice day. Bye-bye.